Thank you all for joining this data collection introduction call for the CLF Benchmark Study version 2. I'm Brad Benke. I'm a CLF researcher. I'm joined here by Mel and Malad, also CLF researchers on the project team. The purpose of today's meeting is just to provide as much information as we can currently about what data collection will look like on this project, so that folks that are either interested just because they're interested, or folks that are interested because they want to share data with this study can have some basic working information as we gear up to start collecting models. So thank you for joining. Again, this is recorded. It'll be posted on our project webpage, as well as sent via all people on the email list to notify them. And I'm going to go over just a really brief project overview today. I'm going to then dive into the data collection overview, which is the main point of this call. We'll talk about kind of the process for participants that want to contribute data to this study, what that looks like. We'll touch a little bit on privacy and data management and go over some next steps as in terms of where we are in this process and what folks can do that are interested in participating. So first, this is the CLF Benchmark Study version 2. We did a benchmarking study in 2017 that we're hoping to make big improvements on. This will be a multi-year project to develop and produce robust whole building LCA benchmarks for buildings. We have a very strong focus on data quality, standardization, and harmonization for this version 2 study. We're going to be conducting in-depth statistical analysis into building systems, materials, and design parameters, and doing a lot of different types of analysis, including sensitivity, variability, and uncertainty of both background data, modeling practices, and a few other things. So a lot more statistical analysis if you're familiar with the 2017 study, and we'll have a lot more data to be able to play around with. We do want to publish. We want to publish building benchmarks. We want to publish our methodologies, background research that we've done, and hopefully a lot more. Some of this work that we're doing, we also recognize that there's a lot of efforts going on in terms of benchmarking, as well as standardizing and producing modeling and reporting requirements. We're hoping that this study contributes to a lot of that and helps inform what a North American whole building LCA repository might look like. So that's a very short description. There is a full project description, an overview video, and more details on our project webpage. The point of today's call, as I mentioned, is really more about the details of our data collection process. So if you're unfamiliar with this project, I encourage you to check out our webpage to get a broader picture of the whole study. We have 3 phases to this project. We completed the pilot phase of it last year, which was essentially testing out our data collection processes, testing out how we structure a data set with the data types that we collected, and doing some really initial preliminary types of analysis just to see what was possible with a very small data set. Now we've launched into phases 2 and 3 of this study, essentially all the same overall project, but with slightly different goals and slightly different timelines. So throughout this year, we'll be working to develop a California total carbon report. This project will involve collecting and analyzing whole life carbon impacts, so operational energy or carbon use impacts, as well as embodied impacts of a discrete set of buildings for California. That has a little faster of a timeline. The larger North American benchmark study, kicking off already at the same time, but going into 2024, perhaps maybe a little bit beyond, will be the full North American analysis of embodied carbon benchmarks, where we're developing a harmonized data set of whole building LCA models that can be used to improve current benchmark estimates of typical low and high embodied carbon values for buildings, and hopefully a lot more. So these distinctions between phase 2 and 3 aren't super critical for folks to understand, but there are a little bit of differences between the data types that we're collecting. So hopefully that will become more clear. Overview of data collection for this project. To start with, I think it's important, if folks aren't already familiar with what firms, or at least a lot of design firms in North America, are doing currently. To start, folks are storing project data about building projects that they have either constructed or are working on or are under construction. Design firms are also creating models, typically BIM models in the US, but not always, of those designs at various points throughout the design process. Some firms are also conducting whole building lifecycle assessments on these models throughout different design phase of the same project. So you might have a model in early design that folks want to do a hotspot analysis on. You might have a model in mid design to see where you're at, and you might have a model at the end of design when you're tracking its final embodied carbon. So folks are using design whole building LCA software to run analyses that then generate LCA results in the form of full material quantities estimates from the BIM model, as well as full environmental impacts of all the materials in that project, or at least in that model. So recognizing that there is a lot of rich data built into all these different steps, our goal for this project is to collect both the whole building LCA reports, as well as lots of parameters about the projects and models that the reports were generated from individual design firms working in this space. We'll be asking participants to upload, collect and organize their data first, upload it to a cloud folder where the CLF will then process it, data cleaning, processing, anonymizing, running basic QA on the data that was submitted before we enter it into our database, from which we will conduct research and analysis. So just that's what we're planning to do on a very high level, and we can start getting into a few more of the actual details. So our goals are to collect at least 200 real-world whole building LCA models with, like I said, project attributes, material inventories, and environmental impacts. We have a very strong focus on this version 2 study on data quality over quantity. So what we're really looking for are well-produced, standardized, and harmonized whole building LCA reports and project information to the extent that is possible, recognizing that people do whole building LCA modeling differently for different purposes, and use different design tools and different whole building LCA tools across the country. So it's a tall order, but something that we're really striving for. And what I mean by high quality data quality, I mean high quality LCAs. That this does not necessarily mean some type of high quality project. We will be looking at all projects, whether they tried to reduce embodied carbon, whether they are a little bit new or a little bit old. What we're really focusing on are complete and comprehensive life cycle assessments, rather than exemplary projects performing for embodied carbon. So some of the ways that we're trying to do this, some of the strategies that we're setting up to ensure that we have high quality data coming in, is that we'll be asking participants to first send full LCA reports that were exported from LCA tools. So as opposed to other benchmarking efforts that have been done where us or others have asked just for design companies to report the total embodied carbon, we'll be asking for the full report from the LCA tool, which provides a lot of transparency on what went into the report in terms of modeled elements and material quantities, and also background data sources for the environmental impacts. We'll also be asking participants to complete a data entry template for each whole building LCA, or at least complete a column of a data entry template for each individual whole building LCA. This will allow for consistency of reporting for a lot of different project information, technical requirements, different LCA methods that people may be used, and just ensuring that all of the data is being formatted in a similar way. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, is that we'll be asking participants to follow a CLF user manual to harmonize whole building LCA modeling and reporting practices. So there will be, it's very possible that folks currently have completed whole building LCAs that might be perfectly suited to go into our data set. It's also very possible that some of the things in our modeling and reporting requirements would be asking somebody to make a change to something that they've done previously or something that they're working on currently. This is a really important step for us to ensure that the data that goes into this data set is comparable and that the results we produce are meaningful. So what will we actually be collecting? We've broken this down into 5 or 6 kind of data categories. The first is really simple. It's just user data, company information, primary contact, et cetera, for the folks that are participating so that we can ask them questions, have follow-up, and identify any issues. So with each of these, there'll be some examples. I won't read them, but that's the second bullet point for all of these categories. The next is project data. So general descriptions and physical characteristics of the building project. You could think of this as things that generally stay the same throughout a project, but also things that might change. So location generally stays the same throughout a project, but building floor area or its height or maybe its structural system may change throughout the design process, and we'll be trying to collect all of that. We'll also be asking for some supplemental project information if it's available and if participating companies are willing to share it. So this would be any additional project documentation that might be useful for us to interpret what the project is, how it was designed, just getting a more thorough understanding of the building with only having limited sort of data entry template format that we're using. So that could be BIM models, it could be material quantity estimates. All of this would be optional, but it would be extremely helpful, and we are highly encouraging it for folks that are willing to share it. Next is the actual embodied carbon data, so comprehensive LCA results corresponding to the building project that include material quantities and full life cycle impacts. Additionally, here we'll be asking for attributes of the whole building LCA analysis. So like some of the methods that were used for doing the LCA, such as what the date of the analysis was, what physical scope was included, study period, etc. For a portion of this study, as I mentioned, the phase 2 for California, we are looking to get operational energy data to complete the whole life carbon assessment of that portion of our study. So for certain projects, this may be all California projects, but it also, once we get enough California projects, we might just say that's enough. You no longer need to send us operational energy data, but we'll make this also optional for all projects. So if North American firms also, or anywhere in North America projects also want to submit operational energy data, that's great, but we're really only starting to ask for it for specific California projects. Lastly, the sixth type of data that we'll be collecting is just qualitative feedback. So verbal or written feedback about the project in general, or AEC practices, or whole building LCA modeling methods, conventions, design workflows, or other practice-based information. So one of the goals of this study is not only to create benchmarks, but to start to understand what the challenges are for design firms that are doing whole building LCA, and how improvements can be made, and how we can increase research in this space in the future. So all of this qualitative feedback will be really helpful for one, giving context to some of the publications that we produce, but also informing our current research methods that we're using on the study, as well as future research methods for additional and future research. So all those different data types will be combined into our data set. So the project data, like I kind of hinted at, will include both project parameters as well as model parameters. We'll have user data to understand who sent it initially so that we can contact them and work with them. There'll be the embodied carbon portion of the data, assessment methods, inventory, environmental impacts, etc., as well as operational carbon data for a subset of this data collection effort, where we're going to be looking at operational energy use, as well as some grid emissions data that we will provide ourselves. But again, two kind of forms of supplemental information here, one on the project side, design drawings, BIM models, etc., and one just to support the project broadly of qualitative feedback. So this is just a quick map of how we'll be kind of creating this relational database for us to do analysis on. To facilitate all of this and make things a lot more clear, we're currently working on a CLF data collection user guide. So this will be a document that we provide that includes our full project requirements, full whole building LCA modeling requirements, and full list of attributes and data fields that will be reported, or that we'll be asking teams to report. This is a work in progress, and it's something that we'll be seeking feedback on from participants. And I should also mention that in this case, this document will be very much tailored to this specific research project. While a lot of the content in it might be helpful for forming other standards, guidelines, policies, rating systems, etc., that's really not what it's designed to do. So that will be made clear too, but I just want to put that out there. So some of the stuff in this user guide I'll go over next, just to give you a sense of what's coming out soon. So we will have some project requirements. They're very broad, but in order to be submitted to this data set, projects are going to need to be real, so not hypothetical design exercises, but actual real, either in design projects or constructed buildings. We want them to be located in North America. We want them to be either new construction, renovation, or reuse. But basically any building use, size, or type, with maybe an exception of single-family residential, and that they include at least one whole building LCA report that aligns with our modeling requirements. So to start, we have a very narrow list of requirements for projects to be submitted. However, we anticipate that we'll start to identify data gaps as data continues to come into this study, and that we would announce different priorities as we're collecting data. So for instance, if we're not getting any projects in the Northeastern United States, or if we're not getting any K through 12 schools, or if we're not getting XYZ, you can kind of see where I'm going. It's going to be important for us to try to fill as many of those gaps as we can, and we will both announce priorities and do kind of targeted stakeholder outreach to try to fill some of those gaps. An example from our pilot phase was that we had very few projects over like 10 or 20 stories. So we're trying to get a very broad diversity of projects, both in terms of their physical characteristics, as well as their geography, as well as the types of sizes of firms that are producing them. So more to come on that as we actually kick off data collection. I mentioned one of the requirements for the project requirement is to have an whole building LCA that meets our modeling requirements. So some examples of criteria that will show up in our user manual of modeling requirements would be design phase. And for each project, we'll be asking that it has a final report from CD phase or later. Final report meaning that it's the most comprehensive or most complete if firms have done multiple analyses throughout design. So we'll also be asking for, in addition to that, if it's available, we will take other whole building LCAs of earlier iterations of the project, which I think could be a really interesting type of analysis that we do to see the trends of what buildings or designs do over time as they go throughout SD, DD through completion. So we will also accept those models, but only if one is identified as the final or most complete. For LCA tools, we're targeting 3 primary whole building LCA tools that allow the physical scope and life cycle stages that we're wanting to study for this project. So Tally, One-Click LCA, or Athena. We don't exactly know what firms are using, and I know that there's a lot of other design tools out there. I think we're limiting it to these 3 currently for those reasons of ability to calculate physical scope and ability to analyze the life cycle stages that we want to see. So within the capabilities of those tools, all life cycle stages must be included and reported. Biogenic carbon must be included, and reference study period must be set to 60 years. There'll be a lot more on this when we produce the manual and send it out, but other things like minimum physical scope per Omni class categorization, we'll be looking for substructure, superstructure, and interior construction, as well as interior finishes if they are included in the project. Additional scope we are very happy to take, but it would need to be reported separately so that we can consistently compare just buildings and not including like site or MEP or other impacts that might be available in certain LCA software tools, but not in others. So we're a little bit restricted in what our minimum physical scope is, and we'll be asking that additional physical scope beyond these categories is reported separately so that we can make accurate comparisons. So what this will actually look like for folks that are interested in sending data is that first we will produce all of the documents that I've mentioned and have them finalized, and participants can then collect and organize their kind of internal data before sending it to us. So their projects, their model data and parameters, their LCA methods that they used, as well as their LCA results, can begin to prepare those. The project data, the model parameters, and the LCA methods then will get inputted into a data entry template that we will supply all of our individual data contributors with a unique and private data entry template. We will also provide a unique and private cloud folder for each firm to submit their data to, where the LCA results will then go into as well. So pretty straightforward, but there's a few things that we'll talk about on the data entry template to explain that process a little bit more. This will essentially be an Excel spreadsheet where one column or one row will equal a building design or iteration of. And there are 6 kind of broad categories of fields or building features or LCA features that we'll be asking folks to report consistently. So the first, as I already mentioned, is participant or user information, their company name, type, size, contact info, etc. And then a lot of general project information. So its name, the name of the report that you're submitting, its description, location, climate zone, stuff like that. Project design information, so more technical or functional or geometric. So like what type of building is it? How tall is it? What's its gross floor area? Things like that. Also structural design information. We'll be borrowing a lot of SE 2050's system. We're not trying to duplicate that study in any way, but some of the categorizations that they've produced for classifying structural systems, we find really useful, and we'll be borrowing a few of those. Then LCA analysis information. So it's design phase, study period, software that was used, physical scope included, and the actual embodied carbon reductions. So we'll be asking for whether or not the project made any attempts to reduce the embodied carbon impacts, and that is by no means a requirement. Projects that maybe firms completed 10 years ago, and then they recently are doing portfolio benchmarking and wanted to understand what the impacts of that project 10 years ago were before they were really looking at embodied carbon. That's great. We also want those projects. So we're not just asking, again, for high performance or projects that made dramatic reductions, but all types of projects. However, we do want to know what reductions were made on some of these projects, and we'll be proposing a way of capturing some of that through our entry template. A few notes about privacy and data management, because we have had a lot of questions. So first of all, we're committed at the CLF to ensuring to the fullest extent possible that your project and company privacy are confidential and protected. There's a few ways that we're planning to see that through. One is a data transfer and use agreement. This will be a document that participating firms sign. It's a standard UW agreement for collecting research data. It includes terms and conditions on just data use, privacy, authorized personnel that will have access to it, review processes for publishing or sharing, and a lot more. So before anybody sends us data, that will all be extremely clear and transparent. We'll also be issuing a data management plan that talks about some of these same concepts in a little bit easier to understand language. So how we will store data, who's going to have access to it, what we're going to do with it, and things like that. Importantly, we also want a very transparent process for anonymization and producing publications. Our goal is to publish useful and meaningful results while maintaining project and company anonymity. And with all of the data that we're collecting, we realize that individual companies may have higher or lower concerns about what some of that information is. And so we'll be working in a collaborative way with all of our data partners to agree on what those reasonable levels of information that can be shared or published are, and establish agreed upon protocols for dealing with any of those fields that may be considered private or sensitive. Similar to our 2017 benchmarking study, this shows up in some fields are completely removed from the data set. Some are aggregated once you have enough data points to ensure anonymity. There's a lot of ways that we'll be transparently and collaboratively working through these with all of our data participants. A really kind of rough idea of our schedule here. I do have some kind of specific dates built into this, but I just want to state that a lot of our schedule depends on how much data we're able to collect and how fast we're able to collect it. So we're coming towards the end of Q2 and hoping that we can start ramping up our data collection now, which would then extend through basically a lot of this year. From that point, the CLF will be, so it's clear, all the blue items are primarily CLF tasks, and the greenish ones are for stakeholder or data participant collaboration. So hoping to collect as much data as we can this year to work towards, producing our database, doing our model QA and evaluation, producing initial benchmarks, and then in year 2, doing a lot more types of statistical analysis and producing other reports from them as well. Throughout 2024, there will also be additional opportunities for stakeholder or data participant review that we'll be able to provide more information on. But essentially, those could be technical review items that we want folks to take a look at. It could also be reviewing preliminary findings, or like I said, working with our partners to establish those agreed upon protocols for project anonymity. But that should give you a loose idea, at least, of when we are planning on doing certain efforts for this study. Okay, next steps. If you watched the previous whole project overview video, we talked a lot about stakeholder engagement types. And I think most of the folks on this call would probably fall into our design and data practitioner category, primarily being actors trying to design lower carbon buildings, architects, engineers, builders, consultants, or other researchers engaged with whole building LCA. One of the next steps that's going to be important for us to identify who is actually interested in contributing data to this study will be sending out some surveys. So we are going to do this. There'll be a couple surveys coming out soon. One will be an expression of interest for contributing data to this study. That might be some of you on this call or watching this video. You might also be here just because you're really interested in this topic and want to see what's going on or provide feedback where you can. There is definitely space for all, and we're trying to get as much participation as we can, but we do need to start understanding who is interested in contributing data versus who just wants to be in the loop and providing technical review or other types of feedback where possible. So we'll be sending out some surveys, and whoever is interested in either portion can complete them, and we'll start to get a sense of who our partners and which interests, who are our partners and which interests they have. On the CLF side, we have several next steps. One is amplifying outreach and interest in this data collection process, and we would be thrilled for any of you to help with this. We'll be sharing this video as well as some other project information to start identifying data partners. We'll be answering questions or having one-on-one calls with all interested contributors. The other thing that we're working on is finalizing all of these draft kind of infrastructure documents that I've mentioned: our data transfer and use agreement, our data management plan, collection user guide, data entry template. And we'll also be producing a collection work plan that will be kind of a synthesis or summary of all of this information in order for folks to be able to share that around within their organization to say, hey, is this something you want to contribute in? Is this something we can contribute to? Having all that information in one place. So a lot of documents will be coming out soon. If you're on this call, you're probably already on the email list to receive all of those. And the next step then will be issuing the surveys that I mentioned on the previous slide, expressions of interest and data availability, as well as just kind of more broader whole building LCA and AEC practice surveys for all interested parties. The last upcoming next step will be scheduling an actual collection workshop. So once we've identified the folks that are interested in sending data for at least this first round, we will have a workshop where we walk through the exact details of that process, answer any questions about the data entry template or file formatting, things like that. So TBD on timing for that actual kickoff workshop, but we'll be targeting sometime late this month or into June. For now, you really only need to watch out for email updates from CLF, and they'll be coming within the next couple of weeks. And if you have not already done so, please fill out our general participant questionnaire on our project webpage. That's the primary email list that we're using for this project.